At this time, we're joined by Sporting Kansas City Sporting Director Mike Burns. We'll start with opening remarks, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Very good. First of all, I want to thank you all for coming here today. I do have a few remarks, and then I'll open it up for questions. I'll get right into it. Obviously, 24 was a disappointing season for all of us, players, fans, coaches, staff. To be honest with you, when I arrived in the summer, without question, I had one eye on the remainder of the 24 season, but I also had an eye on 25, 26, 27, and looking forward as well to the next seasons. As 24 started to wind down, I think it became apparent and evident to everyone that we could certainly not go into 25 with the same roster and the same team that we had in 24. Obviously, the results weren't there. So in MLS, there's not a ton of opportunity or times of the year where you can make significant changes to your roster, and this is the primary time at the end of one season, November, December, going into January of next year. So we had some really difficult decisions to make as a staff, and when the season ended, we had 26 players under contract, 15 of whom were either out of contract or had an option, 11 were guaranteed. So really, we had decisions to make on 15 players. We chose to exercise options on 7 players and move on from 8 players, 4 of whom were out of contract and 4 options we declined, as I think was released yesterday. All 8 players that aren't coming back, and I don't want this to sound disingenuous because I've only been here a short amount of time, but a sincere thank you to all of them for their commitment to the club. But I'd also be remiss if I didn't single out 3 players in particular, in Tim Melia, Johnny Russell, and Andrea Fontes, who have been not only great players for the club for a long time, but ambassadors, teammates in the community, with the fans. And so Peter and I met with Tim, Johnny, and Andreu, and while I won't get into the specifics of those meetings and discussions, what I will say is they were extremely difficult conversations to have from our standpoint, but also I think it's important to note what I will say about the meetings with those 3 in particular was the level of professionalism that they exhibited in those meetings was impressive, right? Because it's not an easy message to deliver. They've been tremendous for the club. Obviously, I'm sure, and I don't want to speak for them, that they'll have, I'm sure, some mixed emotions right now, as do we. But I hope, if not right now, I hope in time they'll also look back with fond memories of their time here and think that the club was also great for them. So I'll answer questions after if you have more specific questions about that, but I think it is appropriate to single those 3 individuals out. 2025, I think there's 2 words that come to mind for me, and one is optimism and the other one is opportunity. Because of the roster moves that we've made, and I'll talk a little bit on and off the field first. Let me actually get to the off-field stuff first. So one of the things Peter and I did in this offseason is we met with ownership. And we're very excited for the opportunity on and off the field. Peter and I met with ownership, and we outlined where we felt we needed more horsepower, just in terms of from a staffing standpoint. And I can't tell you how supportive ownership was. In the coming weeks, and we haven't posted it yet, but I'll share with you today, in the coming weeks, we will look to hire an assistant sporting director whose primary focus and responsibility will be to oversee the second team and the academy. We'll add to our scouting department worldwide. We'll add to our analytics department. And so those are areas that those job positions will get posted soon, and we're very excited to add that. We feel that we need it. We got support from ownership, and we'll move forward on that front. From a player on the field perspective, like I said, opportunity and optimism are the 2 key words, I think, for right now. And I say that because we have the ability to go into 25 we can add a designated player, we can add under 22 initiative players, where we have enough flexibility. We don't have complete flexibility, but we have flexibility where we can add in all lines of the field with all different mechanisms. So we'll look at the reentry, we'll look at free agency, we'll look at the super draft, we'll look to sign homegrown players, but I will say our primary focus is we have international roster spots, so we have a lot of flexibility to add players, which we will. And we have been working diligently since actually before the season ended on targets, potential targets. We've traveled internationally, but we want to make sure we get the right guys. Without question, a primary focus is a 10. We're looking for a guy that can kind of break down lines in the attacking, in the final third. Hopefully, ideally, can score, can set up goals. But as you all know, probably the 9 and the 10 are the two hardest positions to find anywhere in the world. So we are working diligently on that. We will look to add. We'll look to add on all lines of the field, right? So that's kind of where things stand now. We will use all the mechanisms that we have at our disposal to try to make our team better for next year. That's the main goal. We certainly do not want to have a 25 mirror the 24 season. So with that, I will open it up to some questions.
First question, we'll go to Daniel Sperry with the Kansas City Star.
Obviously, you mentioned the amount of players that were out of contract there, and obviously fans, I think, will look at that and say, okay, we're rebuilding. How much of this maybe is just a refresh of culture, of personalities within the group? I think even fans at times have used the word stale to describe the atmosphere and the vibe around the team. And so is that part of that refresh, part of the MO in making so many changes and leaving that space on the roster to fill?
I think that's a fair question, and I think it's not an inaccurate statement or question or a combination of. I think the short answer is yes, but we also, I don't want to say sense that, but we also feel that we need to make changes on the field, but we also need to make changes in the locker room. So I don't know if I'd use the word stale, but I understand we need to get new bodies in. And I don't mean just new bodies for new bodies. We hopefully are going to sign the right guys, both on and off the field. And so I can't completely disagree with that, but we need to freshen up the team on and off the field. And this is only one step. Like I said, we had 11 guys that were under contract, and I kind of want to be careful how I say this because if we had the ability to make more changes, we probably would have after this year. But the reality of it is, and the honest truth of it is that 11 guys, and not all 11 guys, some of them have contract protection, right? Right? So we would have probably made more changes, but when we're evaluating everything and we have only the ability, and I say only, it was a decent amount of players, but when you have 15 players, everything has to come into factor, right? Do we feel short-term, mid-term, long-term projections in terms of the players that we're not bringing back? Where do they fit into that? How can they help us in the locker room, off the field? And honestly, like, you have to factor in budget, right? It's a salary cap league, so that matters on every decision you have to make, or that I have to make, or that I have to be involved in. So it all factors into it, but we need to get some other guys some opportunities. One thing I will say for all returning players and any players that we bring in, and again, I don't want to step into a world or cross the line into an on the field, because that's Peter's world, right? I'll never tell him who has to play, who should play, all of this kind of stuff. But I've had enough conversations with him and the staff since the off season, and I can say this for all returning players and whoever comes in, if they're not hungry and they're not fit, they're not going to play next year. Right, so it's when you talk about staleness, it's not just a staleness on the field. It's refreshing everything we're doing to get the train back on track. And right this year we weren't. And so everything we're doing as a staff, as coach, is to get focused and refocused. Players, coaches, staff, everyone that we're on the same page going into next year.
Kind of touching a little bit on the DP spot there. Yeah. Peter really singled out that number 10 as a very important position in his press conference. I'm just curious, are you guys tied to a DP number, like using that DP spot on a 10 and on an attacking player? And maybe if you, I don't know, what kind of player profile are you looking for someone to fill in that spot?
I can't imagine, because of that position, Daniel, I can't imagine that we would be able to add the number 10 that we're hoping to add without it being a DP, right? Because when you look worldwide, they're other than the 9, they're the most expensive player for a reason. So we're looking to bring in, hopefully, ideally, a guy that we feel can be a game changer, right? And so that's only part of it. A huge component for us is the personality, is the character. We want to try to bring in the right guy on and off the field, in the locker room, all that. And this is not making excuses. That's hard to find, right? We've already traveled internationally. We've met with players. We've seen players live. We're just not there yet. But I would be very, very surprised if one of our DP slots is not used on that number 10, and it would be a slight miracle if it's not, right? One thing I will say is, one thing we haven't done yet, because we want to see how things unfold over the next few months, is we haven't made any decision yet on whether we're going to go the 2 and 4 model, 3 and 3. It'll depend on kind of how things shake out and how things play out with players over the next few months, right? We're not married to a 3 and 3. We're not married to a 2 and 4, but we do right now have the ability to add both under 22 and a DP, and we're 100% looking to add to use those. Ideally, those will be signings that we'll do in the winter, but also it may be a situation where we leave something open for a summer, right? Because in the global kind of game in the world, sometimes it is easier a little bit, not necessarily in MLS, but to acquire players in the summer. So we'll look at all of that, and we are looking at all of that. But again, to just kind of cut to the chase, like we know we have our targets, we have priorities, and it's with 100% the goal of just making our team better next year.
It was almost like a transition there because you started addressing my question with
Okay.
the end part of your answer there, because as you started off this press conference by talking about how this is the biggest business portion of the calendar for MLS,
Yep.
there's that conundrum where it's like the secondary transfer window for the rest of the world. So how difficult is it to do business to bring in players like that during what is everybody else's secondary window?
Yeah, it's more challenging, as I just alluded to it, and it's a good question, fair question. It is more challenging for us to sign players in the winter because it's just like us, right? Like, if a team wants one of our players in the summer, depending on where you are, like this year we moved Caden. I can't tell you what would have happened if we were fighting for a supporters shield and he was our starting. It's harder to move guys out in the summer because you're in the middle of our season. It's also harder for us to acquire players in the winter because it's the middle of a lot of other clubs, you know. So that's a back and forth, and that's challenging. I can't tell you how many times that, you know, I've heard, well, we can't do it right now because we don't have a replacement. But in the summer, they have time. So that's why we want to be smart about how we go about it. Ideally, we'll have all of our players and all of our signings done, but we may not. And I will speak for Peter. I know how Peter operates. Like, in a perfect world, he would like to have all of the players signed by January 1st. But this year, the offseason is even shorter than normal for us because of the qualification for CONCACAF Champions Cup. The draw is on the 11th. It's very likely we could play earlier, which means our preseason starts earlier. So there's all of those things that are factoring into it. But ideally, we'd all love to have our roster set in January. I just don't know how feasible that's going to be given what we just discussed and what players are available to us.
Building on the concept of the market globally and the number 10, I've seen and heard reports about how this is the league of the number 10, and that maybe it's that position's been de-emphasized in some ways in other parts of the world. They're looking for more of these
Hybrid guys,
hybrid-
play 7, 11, 10.
yeah,
That would be
positionless
perfect.
players.
But he's playing in Miami, and he's hard to get.
but in a way, does that make it easier to bring in a classic number 10 if other leagues are not prioritizing that specific type of player anymore?
I don't think easier is the right word because I say that not to dispute you, but I think again, the 9s and the 10s, they're never easy to sign. They're just not. They're at a premium. They're hard to find, right? And then you look at the 7s or 11s a little bit differently, but the 9s and 10s are really, really challenging and really tricky, and that's why they make the most money. That's why. But like, so I don't exactly know how else to answer that question, right?
When you
let go of like what was considered an old guard here. You know, a lot of people would think, oh, you're going to transition to youth when you go to a refresh or a rebuild or whatever terminology you would like to use. Are you focused when you're looking for a 9, a 10? Are you focused on like, okay, we needed somebody here that's young that can develop into our system and just go forward, or are you just looking for somebody experienced? Like, how are you going across that? Just given the financial situation of like, you know, how are we looking for like, do we want to get out the big name? Do we do that? How do you go across doing that?
The short answer is both. We're looking to add, we want to take full advantage of the under 22 initiative, right? And so whether that's one player or two players remains to be seen. I'm not saying we're eliminating this as a possibility, but I think kind of our mindset is we would try to find ideally a little bit more experienced number 10 that isn't an under 22 initiative, but that doesn't mean we're ruling it out. Some of it is on who's available and who we can get, but like we want to use both of those. Like I said earlier, I just can't imagine that the 10 won't be a designated player. Ideally, it will not be an under 22, but it very well could be. But we'll look to fill both of those roles. And the under 22 initiative for me is massively important because not only do we want to, it's a little bit higher risk for sure because they're younger and they're less experienced, but if we hopefully get it right, not only will they impact us on the field, but maybe there's potential for transfer value down the line. So that's kind of how we're looking at that. Again, I know I'm repeating myself on this one, but we just haven't. We're in a good spot that we don't have to decide right now whether we're going to go 3-3, 4-2. But the other thing is, just because a player was designated as a designated player this year, we have the flexibility with conversation with the league. Like we can convert those players, so it doesn't impact their salary, but it impacts kind of the letters next to it, so we can make changes. So which is a good thing for us, right? So and we'll look at that as well.
And just a clarification question from earlier, you mentioned you're adding to the analytics staff and the scouting staff. Just how much or how many people involved in that? Just trying to increase, and because it's different than years past here.
Yeah, the analytics, the additions to the analytics department, we're working through the number of those people. For the scouting department, it's going to be pretty robust. We're right now we have 2 independent contractor scouts in Europe. We'll look probably to add another scout in Europe. We need to have a presence in Central and South America, so it could be up 2 to 3 more there. It might be 1 domestic scout as well. So we are really going to ramp up the scouting department, which I'm super excited about, and the assistant sporting director, like I said, that'll be one role. That'll be one person that we'll bring on sooner rather than later.
You mentioned it's obvious that the 10's the key thing that you're the number one spot you're trying to fill, and you said like there's across all lines you're going to
Yep.
be trying. What's maybe the next highest priority? There's 2 younger keepers on the roster now.
We will. It's a great question. And again, I'll double down on it. Like, 10 is a priority, right? But we will look to add to all lines. I mean, we will bring in another goalkeeper, right? Because right now we have 2. So 100%, right? We'll bring in that. In an ideal world, that'll be a domestic goalkeeper as well. Our preference would be not to have to use an international slot there, but we may have to. We're not there yet. In the back line, we have a lot of numbers right now in terms of the number of players we have in the back line, but we'll also look to add there. In the midfield, it will be a winger, a 10, and right now we have Alan and Willie up top, and there's, as someone once told me, you can never have enough good forwards, right? So if a forward presents itself, or we have an opportunity to sign another forward, we will as well. So I know that's saying everything, but it's all true. And I think we're not doing our job if we don't, because again, to look back at 24, like we need to get stronger everywhere, whether it's a starter, whether it's a depth piece, whatever it may be. So there's no line that we're looking at, midfield defenders, for like we're saying, okay, we're fine there, because we're not fine there. We're not fine anywhere. So we got to get better everywhere. Now, is that reasonable to think we're going to be able to make additions in every line this winter? Probably not, but that doesn't mean we're not going to try.
Historically, the team over the last few years has looked a lot to places like Spain or players who have played in La Liga there. Do you have areas that you specifically like to look for that would fit the model that Peter wants to play?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Just in the last 2 months, I've been to South America, I've been to Europe, so with one of our scouts, and so it's a global search. It's a global search, and that will continue. So I wouldn't say there's any one specific area of the world that we're focusing on. We're focusing everywhere.
And from my looking at the roster, it looks like there's 3, maybe 4 senior roster spots. I think 3, but I could be wrong. Does that make it harder to fill some of those spots that you're looking to get because they have to be at a certain level?
No, not necessarily. Some things could change with our current roster between now and the start of next year. Right now, on a plus side, we are going to receive back some of the international slots that we traded away. So we'll be able to add, right now we have 3. We believe we're really close for one of our current players to receive his green card, which would open up a 4th. So, right there we have 3 or 4 international slots alone that are available, not even touching upon the domestic piece. So we feel pretty good with where we're at from flexibility to add players.
You also mentioned that you're going to add an assistant GM that will focus on the 2 team. How much will you be looking? Historically, they have not brought a lot of players from the 2 team up, or at least not that stayed. How much will that be a mechanism to bring in players that maybe aren't quite ready for MLS, but that you want to see grow into that role?
Yeah, one thing that I've noticed in my short time here is that I do believe that we try to do a good job of vertical integration from our academy to our second team to our first team. One other thing that may be a little bit of a change with the second team going into 25 that's been in the past is that we may look to sign some younger international players, and I wouldn't say that's the priority at the moment. The priority right now is the second team, but one thing that we'll talk to whoever the assistant sporting director is that we'd like to at least explore the possibility of bringing in some young international players in the 18 to 22 range to see how they adjust to not only living in the U.S. but playing for our second team, with the hope, if we get it right, that they may be able to transition to the first team at one point, which we traditionally haven't done in the past, but we'll look to do that this year as well.
Just wanted one clerical, I guess, question. Eric Tommy, I think, was listed as having an option for the end of this year, but then in the press release, it was he was under the guaranteed contracts. Was there a vesting aspect to his option?
I'm impressed that you're following it that closely. I will talk about this. I don't typically like to talk about player contracts, but I know the league and I have to get there too in terms of more transparency, so just bear with me. I'll get there eventually. When I arrived in the summer, Eric had an automatic trigger, which he had already hit, so he became guaranteed kind of midway through this year. So I don't know how he was listed, but he was automatically guaranteed, even though his option triggered, it was over like the 2 or 3 years prior. So he is guaranteed.
And then, as you talk about these U22 initiative slots, I'm just curious, as that rule has now been in effect, I think this is the first contract cycle of the initial 3 years over for some of the players that Sporting had signed under that initiative. What have you learned from it, even from working in the league office and seeing how it's used around the league? And also, where do you feel like, maybe, is there a position that's best used, best invested in? Is there a level of investment that guarantees a better return with those spots? And how do you feel like you guys can utilize that to your advantage too, as you said, to be able to help your team now, but also potentially have sell-on help in the future?
That's a very good question, Daniel. Right now, when you look at our team, right now we have Logan and Robbie that occupy those 2, right? I think moving forward, at least for the next signing, well, I hesitate to even say this certainly publicly, I think we'll look for the under 22 initiative player to be an attacker. We have 2 defenders right now, but we'll look to bring in, try to sign an attacking under 22 initiative player. It doesn't mean it's 100% going to be that, but that's what we'll look to do. I don't think, to answer some of your question there, I don't think we're looking at it right now as it can only be in a certain area of the field. I think we're looking at our team and our roster right now where we think that player might help us. It's stating the obvious, but generally speaking, return on investment is if an attacking player hits it big, it's usually a little easier to move that player on than a midfielder or defender. But I think it's also twofold. I think it's one, we would like to sign an under 22 initiative in the attacking that can help us in the attacking third. But also, there's a huge advantage from a budget standpoint to signing an under 22 player, right? In terms of the benefits that we get. And so we think it's smart to use those spots.
Sorry, back to the two team for a second.
okay.
One of the announcements was Benny Feilhaber was leaving. Is there anything you can say about, was that a club choice or was that his choice or anything?
I'm going to be completely honest with you. I was traveling internationally when Peter and Benny met, so I was not in that conversation. So I don't want to speak for Benny and I don't want to speak for Peter, but what I will say is my understanding of it is that Benny has aspirations to coach at a higher level, and we as a club are completely supportive of that, and that the separation was amicable. So that's all I can really say to that, because like I said, I was not here. I wasn't part of it. I would have liked to have been part of that conversation, or at least involved, but that's my understanding of it. So, and we certainly wish Benny nothing but the best. He's obviously been here a long time and a long-serving member of this club on and off the field. So, we wish him tremendous success.
How is the search going for finding his replacement, or has it even started really?
It's just starting now. I don't actually, I probably should know this, and I don't think we've actually even officially posted it yet, but I can assure you there has been quite an influx of resumes already received.
And part of that vertical integration from academy to the two team and the first team, historically, a lot of the successful homegrowns for Sporting have come from outside of the market area, and some of that freedom of movement has opened up a little bit, and it's not as much as I know you guys would probably want. Is some of that staff part of looking for those players that are not currently in academies or two teams?
And you mean local that are not local?
Well, around the country. I mean, is part of the staff that you're adding going to help recruit those players from outside of this market?
Yes. Well, probably more the domestic, not as much so on the international independent contractor scouts that we will look to bring on board. They'll be more focused on the first team for sure. Primary focus first team, secondary second team, secondary focus. Less so with the academy. That'll be more our domestic scouts than anything.
Any additional questions for Mike? Mike, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you all for your time today. I appreciate it.